Welcome to the Myrna Method live stream. I'm registered dietitian Myrna Haag. The goal is to bring you impactful nutrition information. In this case, it's more in the lines of lifestyle that can significantly impact your life. In this video, we're going to talk about exercise prescription. I am going to relate it to diet, of course, but I want to give you some tidbits on exercise and how it can really impact your life. Not just from the standpoint it's really good for me, but chemically, what does it really do? And most importantly, how much of it do you need to do and what type to really make an impact in your life? So Sam, if you will take it down, let's start this thing rolling. So obviously, what I'm looking at is longevity, immunity, and brain health. Because quite honestly, you have those three things going for you, your life's going to be pretty good from a health perspective. And as far as exercise is concerned, I have a pretty strong resume. I've been a competitive athlete for over 50 years, swimmer, triathlete, Hawaii Ironman, 2.5 mile ocean swim, 112-mile bike, 26.2-mile run. I've also been ranked 5th in the United States, 11th in the world for age group USA Triathlon Championships, competed in several marathons, qualified for Boston. I've been a personal trainer and group exercise trainer for over 40 years. I'm still highly active. The point is, exercise is important, but it's something that I talk about with my patients as being important for different reasons than I think most people think. People think about exercise as part of a weight loss program. I see it all the time. In fact, if they exercise, maybe they don't have to eat as well. It's kind of a false sense of health. They eat a lot of bad food and then they go to the gym for 2 hours. They look pretty good. They got the six-pack going. And they don't really believe they have to worry about balancing their diet or anything with health because they're burning it up at the gym. But what I'm going to talk about in this video is exercise regarding health. What is it we have to do and what is it that we're doing that creates the biggest impact? So exercise is absolutely not the same as being active. Although being active is great, walking your dog and being active because maybe you work a shift in the hospital where you're walking 4 or 5 miles a day. This is all really good. It's active and active calories do count. But there's a certain prescription that goes along with movement, exercise that we're going to talk about, where we can actually make a chemical difference. Certain things happen chemically different than just being active. And what is it that happens chemically? Well, what does it affect? The mitochondria, which is what I tie into longevity. And this is what prevents and reverses metabolic diseases, obesity, type 2 diabetes, dementia, cardiovascular disease. These are the metabolic diseases right now that are plaguing our country. Quite honestly, what is impacting our healthcare the most. And this can be pretty much prevented with diet and exercise. And also muscle mass and its relationship to immunity. A lot of people don't think about muscle and immunity, but there's certain peptides and chemicals that actually get released, get maintained when you have more muscle mass. And there's studies that show you have less muscle mass, you're going to be more at risk for infections, diseases. So muscles carry their own ammunition in helping you stay healthy. Huge as far as immunity. And then brain health. Really, I think of vascularity, not just for brain, but also blood flow and oxygenation that can affect the arteries. So you have an entire vascular system, and the brain is highly implicated in that. So if you have a good vascular system, it really helps with dementia, brain health. It also can affect mood and appetite. And I always think of it as vascularity helping clean up some of the plaques that develop in the arteries and even in the brain. So what goes on with exercise chemically is super important. And it happens two ways. And this is the prescription I want to talk about in this video. And I want to be very detailed and I want to be exact. So you leave this video knowing exactly what you need to do to create the chemicals that's going to make you the healthiest, not just about being active. So mitochondria and brain health, mitochondria being the metabolism, deals with oxygenation and blood flow. And I'm going to explain that a little more detail. But this has to do with a target heart rate, because we know if your heart is beating a certain number of beats per minute, we can bet on that you're going to have a certain amount of exchange of oxygen. That's just the relationship, and we can measure that by counting the beats, our heartbeats. And there is a formula, according to the Center for Disease Control, that if you can do a minimum of 30 minutes a day, 5 times a week, that's 150 minutes a week, of this target heart rate. We want your heart pumping for 30 minutes. In other words, a game of tennis isn't going to count. You can't just do pickleball for 2 or 3 minutes, get a heart rate, and then take a rest and let it come back down. It's a continuous beat of the heart where you can start to develop that vascular system. Also, the second thing that makes a huge difference is the actual intensity on the muscle. And this requires anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes for the upper body, 8 to 10 minutes for the lower body, at a certain intense level. I'm going to go back to the heart rate because that intense level is going to be, if you had to look at a 1 being easy and 10 being the hardest, it's a perceived exertion of about a 6.5. So 5 is middle of the road, and you want to be a little bit above middle of the road, but you certainly don't want to be a 10. Except for when you're building muscle. You actually want to take it to failure. You want to take it up to the 8 to 10 level. So to work the heart, we're looking at a little lower level for perceived exertion. And when we're looking at muscle mass, we've really got to hit it hard. But the good news is we're not talking about massive hours at the gym. We're talking about 30 minutes at a certain heart rate, and I'm going to show you what that means. This is what's going to increase that vascular health, reverse these metabolic diseases, and then the actual muscle mass that actually helps with the immunity. So, I'm going to break it down 2 ways. The mitochondria, which is the metabolism, the vascularity, brain health, is aerobic exercise. And the reason aerobic is because it involves oxygen. And this builds mitochondria, which I'll talk in a little more detail in a few minutes, but mitochondria is actually your metabolism. That's the powerhouse of every cell, has millions of these mitochondria in your body, and these are your metabolism. Muscle mass deals with intensity on the muscle, and this is anaerobic exercise because you're not going to use oxygen as readily in the exchange process as you will with the mitochondria. So let's take a deep dive and really understand what this science means. So aerobic exercise means that you're at a good level of movement to have an exchange of oxygen, fat, sugar, and energy. So you're going to be able to use oxygen that the lungs brings in, the fat and the sugar that you're bringing in from your diet, because that's what the mitochondria use a majority of, and you're going to get energy, this ATP, this type of energy. So this target heart rate has got to use oxygen. In other words, you got to be pumping out that blood at a certain beats per minute to get this continual oxygen pump, this oxygenation. Okay, that's what you have to think of. Blood flow and oxygenation for at least 30 minutes, 5 times a week. This builds more mitochondria, more than anything else, because mitochondria use oxygen. Fat and sugar, but they use that oxygen. So when you make them use oxygen at a little higher rate, you actually ask the body to build more of them. In fact, 12 weeks of working aerobically, you can build as much as double the mitochondria that you currently have. And why is that super important? Because the mitochondria is your metabolism. And when we think of metabolic diseases, this means something goes wrong with your metabolism, which is type 2 diabetes. Muscles do not do well in bringing sugar into the muscle. So the mitochondria is affected. It's a metabolic problem. And the mitochondria is the metabolism. These are the little engines in the cells that actually help you have more energy. So with aerobic exercise, this is one way, because we use more oxygen, bring the mitochondria in, we can actually increase our metabolism. And I give a great story of some patients that have a lot of weight. Maybe they've gained 50, 60, 70, 100 pounds. They've been fasting a lot. They've eaten away a lot of muscle. Maybe they're not as active as they like to be. And they can literally have a difficulty losing weight. Not necessarily because they can't drop the calories. In fact, they drop the calories down to 800 calories a day. Not that anybody can survive on that. And they still have difficulty losing weight. And one of the answers with that is we need to increase their mitochondria. We actually have to bring in aerobic exercise, not because it's going to burn calories. See, everybody thinks of aerobic exercise, oh, I have to exercise because I'm going to burn more calories. Well, you do. But quite honestly, 30 minutes of aerobic exercise may burn 200 calories. It doesn't seem like a whole lot of calories when you look at the whole scope of things, and you're sitting there thinking, is it really worth 200 calories? But that's not why you do it. See, they're not telling you the whole story. If you want to break some of these weight plateaus, which is easily can happen if you're inactive and you've gained a lot of weight, you may find that you just can't drop below that, 200 mark, even though your ideal body weight's 160. You just can't get there. It's so hard. It's so difficult. You find that you have to pretty much starve yourself. And is it really worth exercising for 30 minutes to burn 200 calories? That's not it. You can actually increase the mitochondria. You can increase your metabolism. And that's the ticket. And you do that at the highest level when you can do this aerobic activity. And we're going to give you the formula. We're going to tell you what your beats per minute need to be able to be in this range. Now, anaerobic exercise, all that means is it's too intense. It's too intense for the body, the muscles, to use oxygen and fat as an exchange process to get to energy for the muscle. So anaerobic means that the muscle just uses pure sugar. It uses it anaerobically because it's so intense. So when your exercise is super intense, which means you're doing it for a shorter period, your body automatically begins to use more sugar in the muscle, which gives more reason why I advocate eating a diet of carbohydrates, because you want to get muscles to be energized. But in this video, if you're pushing beyond that, you may lose the aerobic exercise benefit because you're not going to build as many mitochondria because you're losing that oxygen exchange, because when you work intensely, the body just can't get to that oxygen as readily to get out the work you're asking it to do. But the benefit of that is you actually build more muscle because it's very intense. So you can see that with exercise, you've got one part of it, you build more mitochondria, you build more metabolism, and then the other, you build more muscle. Now, a little caveat, if you're a bodybuilder and you are building a lot of muscle and maybe you're not doing a lot of aerobic exercise, you can still have more mitochondria because you actually have more muscle. But if you're trying to get a weight plateau to shift down, I'm going to recommend to my patients to let's understand how we can start building up the mitochondria, and maybe after 3 months, we can have a better, more improved metabolism. So let me just take a little time to explain some things when we're talking about the mitochondria and the burning of fats and carbs, or fats and sugar. Carbs turn to sugar and they get inside the muscle, just so that people can understand. A carb is pasta, bread, fruit. Okay, these are our carbohydrates. When you're burning at a high intensity, like I said, the muscle just can't get to all those fuels, the oxygen, the sugar, and the fat, to give you that aerobic burn. Well, the higher your intensity, the more sugar you burn for the muscle. The less oxygen you use, it goes right to the muscle. And the less fat you burn, because it just can't get to the fat as readily. That's just part of the deal with intense exercise. So when you're doing an active burn, you're doing a level of 8 to 10 instead of a level 5, 90% of what you're going to use as fuel in the muscle is going to be sugar, 10% fat. So you're using very little fat. Just can't access it. But when you're doing a slower activity level, maybe you're even resting, maybe you're just sitting right now listening to this podcast, you're going to burn maybe only 10% carbs and 90% of what you burn is fat. So really, the more sedentary you are, the more percentage of fat you burn. But here's the big ticket. If you're really actively burning that muscle, and maybe only 10% fat you're burning because it just can't get access to it, calorically, you could be burning as much as 450 calories of fat in 1 hour of an active burn, higher intensity. Whereas a much more sedentary movement, maybe walking your dog or maybe just sitting down doing work or reading a book, for an hour, you're only going to burn 50 calories from fat. So I want to throw that little caveat in because I'm a dietitian. I have to relate it to food. I think it's really important to talk about, yes, you burn more fats because it's easier for the mitochondria to use fat and sugar and oxygen when you're at lower levels, but it's always a less of a total burn in calories. And that's what you're really looking for when you're looking at burning fat. So the higher the intensity, the body's going to always burn more carbs than it will fat. But total amount of fat and caloric value, which is really what you're looking at, total amount, will always be more the more active you are. I just want to throw that little caveat in. So bottom line, the mitochondria is the metabolism. So when you think about, I have a fast metabolism or a slow metabolism, how you have to start thinking about that is, I have more mitochondria or less mitochondria. And exercise aerobically can increase that. So let's talk about how do we build more mitochondria aerobically. There is a formula, very easy to compute. You take 220 minus your age, minus your resting pulse. So you get your resting pulse when you get up first thing in the morning. You count the beats per minute for 1 minute. That's your resting pulse. And you multiply that by 65. Now, it can really be, for beginners, as low as 50, but we're going to use 65 on average. And then you add back your resting pulse. And this is that target heart rate. This is the number of beats that your body needs to really oxygenate you, to increase that blood flow, to help with the metabolism, help build more mitochondria, really even reduce these metabolic diseases, help reduce them anyways, because you got to bring the diet in as well. So let's look at some examples and see how it looks with real numbers. So for beginners, let's say you're just starting this, we can put your aerobic capacity at 55%. And some papers show even 50%. So we take 220 minus your age, minus your resting pulse, times 0.55, which is on a level of 1 to 10. If we were going to use perceived exertion, 1 being super easy and 10 being hard, it would mean you'd be a little over medium. You'd be about a 5 to 6 exertion. It would be about a medium level. But we can get it from a heart rate to know exact. So if I take a 55-year-old, I take 220 minus 55 years, minus a resting pulse of 68 beats per minute, times 0.55, and I add back the resting pulse, I get 121. And I always round down because, after all, I am using 55, so I round down, and I'll say 120 is going to start you at your target heart rate for a beginner. Now, aerobic exercise is going to go anywhere from 55 to 80%. Once you start getting above that 75 to 80%, you're really pushing it, your heart rate's going to be much higher, then you could be going more anaerobic, meaning your body's using more energy from the muscle than trying to exchange it with the lungs and depending on the mitochondria. So, how do we get to that number-wise? Approximately 15 beats above your target will pretty much get you there on the edge of anaerobic. So with this person, 120, they're a beginner, I add 15 beats. So we've got a range of 120 to 135 beats per minute. Now, how do you do that while you're exercising? Real easy. A lot of people have these gadgets and watches, I get it, but maybe you don't have one. You stop, maybe you have a watch, you'd need a watch, or your phone, so you could have a stopwatch. You literally take your pulse for 6 seconds and then add a 0. So you take your pulse for 6 seconds and you find it's 12 beats. You add a 0, that's 120. And you know, between 120, if you're a beginner, you're out there walking, you want to really get the prescription of getting that aerobic capacity, you want to build the mitochondria, you would like to think you could do it for 30 minutes, and I'll just give you a little tidbit of information here. It's going to mean you'll be out for probably 35 to 40 minutes because it can take you 5 minutes to work up to that heart rate. So you're going to be exercising probably 35 minutes minimum. And then once you get that heartbeat, maybe every 5 or 6 minutes you want to take it again. But once you get used to knowing what it feels like, you really don't have to do it because you know this is the level it takes. But that's a really good way to know your aerobic. And the perceived exertion is going to be, well, I say 6, but it's really anywhere from 5.5 to 8. So when you start getting over 8 perceived exertion, it starts getting harder, pretty hard. Then this is anaerobic. So that's important because we have to separate it out from aerobic to anaerobic because they both do different things. And in this case, I'm really trying to drive home the point we're trying to increase the mitochondria, the metabolism. Get you off your weight plateaus. So you can't starve yourself. You can't keep going down to 900 calories and think you're going to lose weight. This is not the answer. And if we look at what the average target heart rate, and what you're typically going to see is 0.65. Somebody who's used to going out there and, working out in the gym, they're a little more fit than a beginner. They're going to use the same formula, 220 minus their age. So this is the example, the same person, they're 55 years, their resting pulse is 68, but we're going to use 0.65. It's actually 130 beats a minute. So it's only 10 beats above, which is 0.65 is pretty standard for somebody who is fairly active. So the aerobic exercise is anywhere from 60 to 80. Anything over 80, you start clicking into too much intensity. Not that it's a bad thing. A lot of people like to do HIIT training, right? I'm going to give you some examples of maybe working aerobic because we still have to hit the muscle 8 to 10 minutes, lower body and upper body. So I'm going to give you some examples at the end of this on how we tie this all together. So when you're looking at building your fitness, you're looking at the aerobic capacity because, as I said, it does get you off some of these weight plateaus because you've got to build your metabolism. It's not about calories, dieting. It's actually about eating balance and not dieting, understanding the science behind nutrition. But this aerobic exercise also shows promise in reversing some of these metabolic diseases. In this study, regulation of mitochondrial dynamics by aerobic exercise in cardiovascular diseases, which is a study that talks about evidence showing aerobic exercise can effectively regulate the coordinated circulation of mitochondrial dynamics, which means they're going to increase the mitochondria efficiency, size, and number, thus inhibiting cardiovascular disease development. Why is that? Because cardiovascular disease is about inflammation in the arteries and plaque that builds up in the arteries. And what is dementia? It's plaque that builds up in the brain, similar. And what helps with this is vascularity. You want to clean that area up. And this is what this does from a health perspective. Now, I talk about it from a weight perspective because, yes, I want you to develop those mitochondria for your metabolism. But as the blood circulates, because remember, you're oxygenating You're oxygenating because you're getting those beats per minute up. And this oxygenation process is what they refer to when they talk about reversing some of these metabolic diseases. It oxygenates you, especially when we're talking about when we're talking about the brain and we're talking about heart disease. Now, when I'm talking about weight loss, I'm really switching it over to the actual mitochondria. But once again, the oxygenation in the blood flow in this particular study is what they're referring to. And they talk about aerobic versus anaerobic exercise training effects on the cardiovascular system because there are two different effects there. And the cardiovascular system depends on the blood flow and the oxygenation, but the anaerobic depends on the muscle build. So let's get into the muscle build. When I think about muscle build, I'm thinking about looking strapping strong and pretty awesome. But what's really going on underneath that? The muscle immunity. Muscles release chemicals. That's really what I want you to get out of this. Myokines, protein-like hormones, these little peptides, as much as 500 to 600. There's a lot of these. And there's receptor sites on cells that these interact with, and they promote health. It also releases immune cells, which is good because you want a good immune system, neurotransmitters that help with mood, help with appetite control. So bottom line, it's an immune booster. So when muscle movement is involved, it releases these chemicals. So yes, activity is good and building muscle is good because you want these chemicals to take place. But we also want to bring in the vascularity side of it. So yeah, moving is going to produce this, but moving a little more intensely can also click some of the other things I'm referring to, the vascularity. But muscles in themselves and increasing the muscles on your body has huge immune benefits because of all the chemicals that are tied into muscle development. So contracting muscles, when muscles are working, they release immune cells. Now, we always think of immune cells as either if they're released, is it pro-inflammatory, is it anti-inflammatory? But specifically with exercise, they become anti-inflammatory. And they help with our immune system with infection. In fact, when we have elderly people who are aging, who don't have all the hormones to develop muscle, it's even more important that they work their muscles daily because they don't have the testosterone, the estrogen to hang on to those muscles like they did when they were younger. So it's more important to do it more often. In this study, it talks about the underappreciated role of muscle in health and disease. And there's many studies that talk about the muscle metabolism and how they play a key role in the genesis and the prevention of many common pathological conditions and chronic diseases. Specifically, we talk about metabolic diseases, but also infection. So when we have more muscle, we have less infection because of the immune cells that are released. And also the myokines, these little peptides that are secreted from muscles. And they have a lot of biological function as well. So there's a lot of chemicals that go on with you having more muscle. Also, it helps with functions in the brain. So we have peptides that are affected there. And this can help decrease neurodegenerative diseases, particularly Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's. These are a few. So they have found that exercise can actually produce brain chemicals that reduce or prevent some of these, or I should say, reduce the risk of some of these diseases. So when we look at patients and we try to understand this, I use another podcast and I'll kind of come back to it. My patient, she's 67 years old, Sandy. She's 5'3", she weighs 126 pounds. Certainly she's at her ideal body weight. Anybody looking at her would say she looks terrific, and she certainly does. But she is 18 pounds over fat because she's 13 pounds under muscle. So when we look at her stats here from my in-body machine that actually measures her body composition, her muscle fat ratio, we would like her to be under 28% fat. Well, she's at her ideal body weight, but she's too fat, a skinny fat. But what I want you to notice is that when you look at the segmental lean analysis as I show here, and if you're listening to me and you're not seeing it, I'll explain it. We want your arms and legs and your trunk. We want these to be 100% of what they should be, muscle, for your age and your size. So we want everybody to have 100% of the muscle they should. And in this case, the machine shows that for her left and right arm, she's at 69 and 70%. She's not even at 100%. And in her left leg and right leg, she's in the 80s. She's 81 and 82. She's literally 25% less muscle, percentage-wise, than she needs to be. She's active, but she doesn't do exercise from a prescription standpoint. And that's the thing I want to really stress. She's at her ideal body weight, but she's not doing exercise prescription, okay? She's not just pushing it enough to be able to promote muscle mass, which, by the way, only takes 8 to 10 minutes on your upper body, 8 to 10 minutes on your lower body. You can be active all day, but if you're not really hitting the muscle with just enough push, it doesn't trigger growth. And also, she's not working cardiovascularly. So we really can't open her up and look inside her brain or vascular system, but I can tell you that her labs could be better. She's on statins, typical, and what she's looking at is that she weighs what she should, which a lot of people just looking at weight loss and a lot of times not looking at the body composition or what's really wrapped around that weight loss. So now I'm going to take my patient Betty. She's 61 years old. Once again, she's 5'1". She's a runner. She weighs 106 pounds. She's definitely within her lean body weight because for someone with that height and that age, she could easily be 105 to 115 pounds, still be ideal body weight. She's 106. She's a lightweight. A lot of runners are. But if we look at her statistics and her body composition, her legs are beautiful. She's at 100%. Her left leg and her right leg, they're 107 and 104%. She's looking great. Well, she goes out 3 to 4 days a week. Vascularly, she's hitting it. She runs anywhere from 35 to 45 minutes. She's at her target heart rate. Go, Betty, go. Vascularity, she's looking great. Her body fat is where it should be, but she doesn't have the muscle mass. She's not working her upper body. So what does this mean for Betty? It means that Betty has less immunity, right? Because her muscles in her upper body could be better. Now, vascularity, she's doing great. But there's a little more to it than just that. We want to keep two things going. We want to keep you aerobic. We want to get the blood flow. We want to get you oxygenated. Betty's doing that. But we also want to increase muscle immunity. We want to create more mass. So that just gives you an example because I want to go back now to the prescription and show you how we get there. Let's just go and review. Why are we doing this? We want our metabolism up. We want to increase our mitochondria. We want good vascularity for good brain health and good artery health. We want to oxygenate with good blood flow. That comes with a target heart rate, beats per minute. We want to do it a minimum of 30 minutes at this target heart rate 5 times a week, 150 minutes a week. We want a perceived exertion. We'll take a 5 if you're starting out as a beginner, but ideally once you get a level 6, maybe 7. And then we want to increase the muscle mass. That means we want 8 to 10 minutes of upper body, 8 to 10 minutes, think about that, that's not a lot, of a level 8 to 10. So that means we really want to push the muscle. And 8 minutes for many people can be plenty. So that would mean that maybe you're working some weights and you might lift weights for 15 minutes to get 8 minutes out of it that are fairly intense. And same with the lower body. Because with muscle, it's more about intensity. With becoming aerobic, you don't have to have quite the intensity. So let's look at some application. Let's look at some real exercise prescription. This is what I do as a trainer when I'm really just trying to get people to be their healthiest. I'm not expecting them to be at the gym for 2 or 3 hours. Now, if they want to be at the gym for 2 or 3 hours, I congratulate them to do that. But if we're just trying to get what we need to get out of this thing, being our best, here it is. 10-minute warm-up, because you're not going to get to target heart rate right away. You got to warm up. So it could be 5 to 10 minutes. Take that into consideration. Then you're going to do 30 minutes, and you know the formula to do that. You do the formula, figure out what your target heart rate is. Remember, if you're a beginner, you can start it at a lower level. And then you just have to get 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes of leg intensity and 8 to 10 minutes of arm intensity. Now, it's beautiful if you could try to do that while you're doing a target heart rate. And I'll show you how that looks. And then, of course, your 5-minute cool down. So that's what it would look like in a nutshell. But let's really get some applicable examples of how I'm doing it when I actually train people. I tell most people, look, just expect 35 to 40 minutes. I don't think you can get it done under 40 minutes. 45 ideally. And I'm talking about 4 days for the muscle work, even if you're doing it every other day, 4 times a week. If you're doing a little more aerobic, 35 minutes, you're going to meet the CDC's requirement of 150 minutes a week. But let's just give you an example. We got our warm up, 10 minutes. Now, it's going to be pretty easy to do legs if you're out there doing something aerobic, whether it's running, walking, cycling. So you would do 1 minute of harder leg work where you really feel the legs burn, and then you would do 1 minute easy. And you would do that for 8 minutes. So you would start your target heart rate, get it going maybe for 5 minutes, and then you would do 8 sets of a little harder leg work. Maybe you do squats in between you'd be walking and maybe you do some squats, but you would feel the muscles in those legs burn for maybe a period of a minute. Maybe some people run a little harder. They might do what's called HIIT training, but then you got to bring it 1 minute easy. Because when you go up with the intensity and muscle, your heart rate's going to go up as well. And then you're going to bring it right back down, keep moving for 1 minute easy. So your heart rate's going to probably go anywhere from the 120 beats up to the 135 because you're not going to do it more than a minute. You're just going to do it enough to really get the legs pushing, that intensity. And then you're going to cool down 5 to 10 minutes. And that's going to easily give you your 30 minutes at target heart rate. And then what I tell my patients, because it's going to be really tough to try to do the upper body with that. So then I would take 4 to 5 sets, maybe I do some light dumbbells, maybe 5 to 6 pounds, because it's going to depend on you and your size, maybe 10 pounds if you're a bigger person. And you're going to try to do 7 to 8 minutes where you really get those arms burning. Now, what that typically means is that you might end up doing 4 to 5 sets. And you would start it out and it wouldn't burn right off. But as you get at the end of the sets, if you're doing 20 reps, then you're going to really feel it burning the last 10 reps. And if you're doing 4 or 5 sets, it means you'll probably get 2 sets where you're going to get that level 8 to 9. Bottom line, we're hitting the upper body intensely. Maybe you're doing it with some push-ups, you got some dumbbell curls, you're doing some biceps. Bottom line, I'm not giving you the exercise, I'm giving you the prescription. You got to go get the exercise. Is that we're really hitting the legs 8 minutes and we can do it aerobically. That would be great. Tie it in with that. And then you got about an extra after you finish with your aerobic. You've got about an extra 10 minutes of upper body arms. A lot of people will pump out some push-ups. They'll do some dips and some free weights. And believe it or not, because I do a lot of the in-body machines with patients, I can really get my patients up to 100% on their muscle. And to me, I think it's pretty easy because it's not like you're having to do a massive amount, but you have to do enough to trigger the body to maintain your muscle at 100%. Now, obviously, if I have bodybuilders, those numbers will be much higher. Somebody's at the gym, they're really lifting the iron. Their muscle can be 115%, 120%, and hooray for that. I applaud that. But I want to make sure that you at least are at 100% of what your muscle should be based on your body size, your age. And, when you look at perceived exertion, 8 or 9, it's going to be based on you, right? It's going to be based on what your 9 is. So for a bigger person, they might need 10-pound dumbbells or maybe 15, and somebody else, 5-pound dumbbells can work just fine because we're working off your perceived exertion. Bottom line, how it works is that we want to make sure, going back to the summary, is that we're bringing in the oxygenation, the blood flow. We're helping with that vascularity, 30 minutes at that target heart rate, and then we're hitting the muscles 8 to 10 minutes lower body, and if you can do it with the heart rate, good for you. And then you got 8 or 10 minutes for the upper body. So hopefully this helped you guys. I also want to mention, I always do in the podcast, if you're interested in more information, especially on diet, you can join my membership at myrnamethod.com. And I take extra time with you on a podcast science on how to eat. Because exercise is great, and nobody likes to hear this, but 80% of it is what you put in your mouth. So even if you're out there exercising and you look great, you're getting the vascularity, yes, it helps, but you got to do the diet side of it to make this thing really work. And of course, I always mention my book. You can always buy it on Amazon, Why Your Diets Fail and the Science That Really Works. You can get it on Kindle for $2.99. To me, that's a no-brainer. Okay, Sam, do we have anybody?
We do. Hold on. We have 2 things. Here you go.
Awesome. What is the machine that measures muscle percentages? Well, it's a super expensive machine that I have. It's an in-body machine. It costs about $6,000 to $7,000. I use it because I use it for my patients. But it's an impedance test that just measures through, it's some kind of, I don't know the kind of energy they uses, but you hold on to some electrodes and it kind of measures your body composition. I know that they have some on Amazon that you can buy. I'm not sure how good they are. Honestly, some gyms have them, and you can look at in-body. I guess, I don't know if you can bring it up on the internet and I can look at the machine. Is this 8 to 10 minutes weekly? Good question. I forgot to say that. 8 to 10 minutes is every other day. Okay, especially over 60. And I would say that what I have found with my patients, and I'm saying over 60, where I really see a loss in muscle, where after about 3 or 4 days of not heating the muscle, they can lose as much as 1 to 2%. But working your muscles every other day, I find maintains that 100%. So hopefully that helps. So I would say 4 days a week, right? 3 to 4 days a week of muscle, you're good. So you're doing target heart rate 5 days a week. So maybe you're doing 3 days or 4 days, for sure, 3 minimum, 4 of doing some muscle work in addition to that. I believe, yes, the machine is called InBody. Doctor clinics tend to have them. If you live in Tampa, you can contact me. You can get on my machine. That's never a problem.
If you want, you can pull up a picture of an InBody machine if you go to your browser and type it in, and I can share the screen.
Well, the only reason is maybe we can call InBody and find out if they have like a chart of where InBody machines are in the U.S. I don't know. I'm just thinking that if that's possible. Let's look into it, and we can do that. But that's a really good question. Actually, I believe every doctor's office should have these. So maybe you could talk to your doctor, because weight is not the issue. The issue is body composition. And really, doctors should be looking at that, not this BMI, body mass index, or what you weigh, because I showed you an example of a patient who's at her ideal body weight, but is actually over fat, right? She has less muscle. Anyways, any other?
No, that seems to be it.
Okay, awesome. And anybody in Tampa, you can get a hold of me, or even in the St. Pete, Tampa area, or even Orlando. You want to drive by? Not a problem. Not a problem. Okay. Like and subscribe. Always do that. I appreciate it. And it's growing, and I appreciate it. It makes me work harder. I get super excited.
We're close to 1,000.
We're close to 1,000. Yay. All right, Sammy. We couldn't do it without Sammy. I don't do IT. Okay. Good to go?
I think so.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. And I'll see you guys next week.